Hey guys, in this video, I want to give you a couple of dietary tips and lifestyle tips for correcting leaky gut. As we talked about in this recent video here, leaky gut is a condition where the intestinal wall becomes permeated largely by inflammatory metabolites from bacterial overgrowth or endotoxins, which again damages the gut lining, allowing food particles, toxins, and even pathogens to enter the bloodstream, causing an immune reaction. And leaky gut in this way is a major contributing factor to the development of a wide variety of not just inflammatory conditions, but also autoimmune-like conditions. So needless to say, having a leaky gut is a huge issue, and it's one of the major undiagnosed digestive problems that people face today. And there are a couple of very simple things that you can do to either contribute to it that people are doing unknowingly, or to stop it and correct it altogether. So a lot of the foods that people eat today that are considered healthy are actually gut irritating foods that are contributing to the irritation of the intestines and even the leakiness of the intestines that you're going to want to stop eating immediately, or at least greatly reduce your intake of. And at the same time, there's a couple of very simple foods and supplemental foods that you can start incorporating today, which will help to reverse the inflammation, the damage done, and accelerate the regeneration of the intestinal lining. So the first thing to understand are perhaps the foods that cause leaky gut. Again, we already talked about this in a previous video, so if you want to learn about some of the major offending foods to gut irritation, be sure to check out these earlier videos. But the very refined version of that video is that it is actually the grains, a lot of the plant foods, the legumes, the beans, the nuts and seeds, and even the so-called healthy plant oils and plant fats that are major contributing factors to leaky gut. In one way, the grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds have difficult to digest fibers that can actually irritate and inflame the gut, and that don't break down properly in the intestines, causing them to ferment, which increases the production of toxic metabolites like lipopolysaccharide or endotoxins, which can inflame and damage the gut. At the same time, these foods tend to be estrogenic, and as we talked about in a past video, the estrogenic effects of the polyunsaturated fats and the so-called essential fatty acids like EPA and DHA can actually contribute to edema, or the swelling of the cell or the tissue in the intestinal wall, which can actually damage the intestinal line and cause protein degradation. So it causes them to basically swell up and waterlog and become leaky or damaged. And these foods are foods that a lot of people consider to be healthy, and especially if you're on a plant-based diet, you're probably consuming a lot of these, and they could be a contributing factor to gut leakiness. So I generally recommend to avoid the consumption of these foods and at least not make them the staple part of your diet. Instead, taking a look now at some of the foods that are a bit protective to the gut, foods actually like bone broth that contain a high amount of collagen or gelatin, or specifically the amino acids glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, are actually powerfully anti-inflammatory and prevent the inflammation present in leaky gut. So some of the mechanisms behind bone broths or collagens or gelatins anti-inflammatory and anti-stress effects have a lot to do with these amino acids. So glycine, for example, is a GABA agonist. It can actually increase GABA activity and production, which is a natural antagonist to the stress hormone cortisol. So in this way, collagen, gelatin, bone broth, or specifically glycine can decrease cortisol and increase GABA, which is incredibly protective to the intestines, because high levels of cortisol can actually catabolize and waste the intestinal lining, or all the tissues, including the skin tissue in the body. And high cortisol and high stress is basically the major contributing factor to leaky gut, as we talked about in that video. But it's not just psychological stress that causes a chronic production of cortisol, but there can be dietary and nutritional stressors that can cause this as well, such as consuming inflammatory grains and inflammatory plant fats. But the bone broth has a protective effect and an opposite effect in this way. Additionally, it's important to have an amino acid balance in the body that is favorable to good health. And bone broth, or gelatin and collagen, provide those amino acids that are otherwise lacking in most diets, even in healthy diets or plant-based diets. So getting enough glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline is important, because when these amino acids are deficient and there's a higher level of, let's say, tryptophan or methionine, the body starts to experience inflammation, and that inflammation can damage the intestinal wall and lead to gut leakiness. Not to mention that bone broth is rich in collagen and gelatin, which provides a very anti-inflammatory, nourishing protein for the development and regeneration of skin tissue. So in this way, consuming enough bone broth can help regenerate the skin, and ultimately the intestines is very similar to the skin tissue. So in a couple of different ways, the consumption of bone broth is very therapeutic for anybody with leaky gut. My third dietary tip for correcting leaky gut is to take a look at the fibers that you're consuming. Not all fiber is created equally. As I discussed in the earlier video, the soluble fibers can actually be very difficult to break down, causing the bacteria in your intestines to ferment, which can produce inflammatory metabolites and the proliferation of lipopolysaccharides or endotoxin, which is a major contributing factor, if not one of the contributing factors to leaky gut. And again, most of these difficult to digest fibers or fermentable fibers are in your plant foods, the various grains, beans, legumes, but you're also going to find them in a lot of unripe, starchy vegetables. So consuming too many sweet potatoes, for example, or even consuming unripe fruit, things that are really high in pectin in the skin, can also cause gut fermentation, inflammation, and gut leakiness. So I usually recommend getting your fiber from things like really ripe organic fruit, particularly cooked ripe fruit if it's a stone fruit like an apple or a pear or cherries or a peach or a nectarine. And in addition to getting the bulk of your fiber through organic ripe fruits and sometimes cooked organic fruits, I would recommend aiming to get 1 to 2 medium raw carrots in your diet, well-cooked button mushrooms, well-cooked white potatoes, and even bamboo shoots, all which contain natural antimicrobial gut cleansing fibers, which are not fermented by the bacteria in your gut, so they don't cause any sort of gut fermentation, but are really great at bulking up the stool, collecting toxins and various stress hormones, and eliminating them from the body. So this can help to protect the body from any sort of inflammation and help to drag out any sort of inflammatory toxins from the body, along with estrogen, which is a contributing factor to the degradation of the intestinal lining. My fourth and final tip is to get a handle on your stress. So ultimately, everything we've discussed so far are just various forms of dietary stressors. But as I've discussed in past videos on the causes of leaky gut, it is truly stress that causes it, because it is the stress hormones which impair metabolic function, causing energy issues, oxidative stress, inflammation, and ultimately the damage that is done to the intestinal wall. So getting a handle on all sorts of stress, particularly your other lifestyle stressors, environmental stressors, and your mental and emotional stress, is also going to be essential for correcting leaky gut. A lot of the times in my experience as a wellness practitioner and the creator of the Perfect Digestion course, I've talked to thousands of people with digestive issues, everything from chronic digestive cancers and chronic digestive diseases like Crohn's disease to people with gas and bloating. I always find a high prevalence of psychological stress or some sort of emotional stress in their life. So I think that's always essential, and that's why I created an in-depth protocol on managing psychological stress in the Perfect Digestion course, and why we have tons of videos on the YouTube channel that talk about how to handle mental and emotional stress. But needless to say, getting a handle on stress altogether, looking outside just the realm of dietary stressors, you're going to want to look at, again, the environmental stressors. You're going to want to look at the various lifestyle stressors you might have in your life, drinking, staying up late, not getting enough sleep, and also the psychological stressors. So getting a handle on those is essential, but I always recommend that along the way that you supplement with adaptogenic herbs like KSM-66 ashwagandha, like cordyceps, like Siberian ginseng or eleuthero, like rhodiola or holy basil, ginkgo biloba. All of these adaptogens are incredible tools for regulating the hormones in the body and bringing down the chronic elevation of the stress hormones while you're getting a handle on the cause of the stress. All right, guys, so there are my 4 tips for correcting leaky gut. Keep in mind, this is not everything that you could do, because ultimately it is stress which contributes to not just leaky gut, but all sorts of digestive dysfunction or digestive issues. So if you want to learn more beyond this video or beyond our YouTube channel, definitely be sure to check out our Perfect Digestion course in the description box below. Otherwise, that does bring this video to a close. If you've enjoyed it and found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet already. And for additional information and resources, be sure to check the description box below for links to our online wellness academy, blog, and tonic herb shop.